Today is the first Sunday of Advent, year C. We begin a new liturgical calendar. Advent is the new year in the church's liturgical calendar. And today's readings invite us to stay awake for the coming of the Savior. Advent is a time of waiting, a time of preparation for a very important event in the life of all of us, in the history of our salvation. It is a time of longing and desiring for the coming of the Savior. And normally, Advent, or this period of desiring, of waiting, of longing, comes with some sentiments of anxiety and fear. The feeling of not knowing what to expect, uncertainties. And this is captured in the first reading today and in the Gospel. The first reading from the prophecy of Jeremiah, inviting us, reminding us of the promise of God. God taking the initiative and announcing the coming of the Messiah. This particular reading is one of those regarded as the prophecies about the Messiah, the Messianic prophecies, foretelling of the arrival of that promised Messiah. It is a declaration made by God Himself. And this becomes the beginning of the realization of that promise made long ago to David. Your dynasty will last forever. And this Messiah, this Savior, will come from the branch of David. Again, in this prophecy of today, the coming of the Messiah will bring peace and security. Peace and security. The prophecy was made when the people of Israel were undergoing difficulties, challenges, political crisis. They were in exile. Eventually, the immediate realization of this prophecy comes when Cyrus allowed the people, allowed the Israelites to go back to their land and rebuild the temple. But of course, the ultimate fulfillment of this is in the birth of Jesus Christ, the Messiah of the world. The people of Israel expected a political Messiah that would achieve this with all fanfare, with all political conquests of their enemies. But Jesus comes in humility. Jesus comes going through the way of the lowliness, of the humble, of the poor, through the way of the cross in order to achieve this. So Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of this. And this season, we prepare to commemorate that His first coming. Yet in the Gospel of today, Jesus tells us of His second coming. With all the apocalyptic imageries that will bring fear, that will bring some kind of worry and anxiety to the people. Because the heavens, the stars will be darkened. There will be great distress in the heavens. There will be wars. There will be a lot of challenges. A lot of things happening that are not usual, that are not normal. But that notwithstanding, Jesus tells us, calms the fears. He gives us hope. He tells us when these things begin to happen, when they begin to take place, do not worry. Strengthen up and raise up your heads because your redemption is drawing near. How can that be? That in the midst of all that has been described, you are telling us not to worry. This is because he knows what is happening. He holds the times in his hand. He holds everything in his hand. He is dispelling those fears that we have. Whatever it is in life, do not worry. That is a moment of encounter. That is the time that God is realizing something new, something great in your own life. I always laughed when one of my professors would say, that to behave abnormally in an abnormal situation is normal. And here, this is an abnormal situation, and Jesus is telling us, do not worry. Your salvation is close at hand. Of course, we know the darkest moment of the night ushers in the dawn of a new day. That is the type of thing Jesus is telling us. Do not worry. Calm down. Be happy. Because all you have desired and longed for, all the salvation that was promised in the past is coming to fulfillment. Do not worry. Raise your heads high. Your redemption is close at hand. Again, just as we know when the pangs of childbirth, of labor, comes on the woman, the pregnant woman, this is always dispelled by the joy of new life, the joy of motherhood. That is the type of thing Jesus is describing. So between the first coming, which we commemorate at Christmas, and the second coming at the end of time, the eschatological coming of the Savior, there are numerous moments of Jesus coming into our own lives, our situations. And he comes in the ordinary events of life. He's always there with us. And as we wait for that eschatological coming, the second coming of the Savior, now Jesus tells us how to live our lives, what to do. The first thing he tells us, watch. Be observant. Watch lest your heart be weighed down. And there are many things that can weigh down our lives. We need to avoid those things that can distract us from being resolute, committed to this second coming. Jesus talks about dissipation. He talks about the pleasures of the world that is represented in the drunkenness and other cares of the world that he mentioned in the gospel today. It all means setting our priorities right and letting nothing disturb us or distract us from this purpose of waiting and working for our salvation. St. John of the Cross tells us that there are three enemies of the spiritual world, of the spiritual life: the world, the devil, and the self. And again, he says the self is the most tenacious because the self is always with us. So we need to curb that desire. Those things, pleasure that the self needs, the ego, to subdue them, to discipline them, and not allow the desires of this world, the quest for material things, to distract us, to take us away from looking forward to that moment of salvation. The Catechism tells us that God has made us to love him, to serve him in this world, so that we'll be with him in the next world, in the world to come. And understanding this purpose will make us to set the goals and the means of achieving those goals. And that goal is union with God. Watch, lest your hearts be quiescent. The second thing he tells us is staying awake at all times. This doesn't mean that we do not sleep, but being conscious. It means living every moment as though it is our last. Jesus can come now. We have to watch. We have to stay awake. We have to know. We have to be conscious of that. And Jesus has taught us how to do that in his compassion and love for everyone. Living every moment as though it is our last. Living in the present. It was St. Irenaeus that said that the glory of God is man fully alive. Staying awake means being you, being who you are created to be, understanding the dignity with which God has created us and what that means, and living it out. Being really human in our relationship with God and our relationship with others. Reaching out in compassion. And St. Elizabeth of the Trinity invites us to live our lives continuously. The life of praise to the glory of God. She tells us, I found my heaven on earth because heaven is where God dwells and God dwells in my heart. And if we understand that God dwells in our hearts, then we make conscious effort. We stay awake, cleaning, purifying, and making that abode, that dwelling place of God, to remain what it should be. To be clean at all times because God resides there. And we live like those tabernacles, carrying God, Jesus, around. And the third thing Jesus tells us today is to stay at prayer. In the Carmelite tradition, prayer is not just what happens when we go to church, when we kneel down, or when we shut the door. Prayer is a relationship. And St. Teresa of Avila tells us that prayer is taking time frequently to be with the one whom we know loves us, acknowledging the presence of God, the importance of God in your life, irrespective of where you are and what you are doing at any point in time. Prayer becomes a way of reciprocating that love that God has shown us to accept to be born like one of us. St. Luke, in chapter 18 of his gospel, tells us to be at prayer at all times and never lose hope. These are three of the numerous ways of preparing spiritually for the coming of this Messiah. Whether it is commemoration of his coming at Christmas, which is always reenacted, or his coming at the end of time, or these intermittent comings in our lives, in the sacraments that we celebrate, in the events of life, in the people we encounter, in the situations we find ourselves. We should always be watchful, staying awake, and praying. And these three things go hand in hand. They cannot be separated. We have to be awake and watchfully pray at all times. If we haven't started, let us begin to keep watch at prayer. And if we have started, let us be encouraged to continue as Jesus has taught us today. And remember, let these things let nothing distract you. St. Teresa would tell us, only God suffices, and whoever has God has everything. Let us make good of this invitation, and let us prepare for the coming of the Savior, who indeed is already with us and comes to us in every moment in our lives.